Okay, I think I'll just go ahead and get started. My name is Charlie Nunn. I'm at Duke University in evolutionary anthropology, Duke Global Health, and I run the Triangle Center for Evolutionary Medicine. And as those of you who come here often know, we organize this seminar series with through TRISEM and a bunch of other evolutionary medicine centers. I hope I've put them all into the chat successfully. We also organize this with the International Society for Evolution Medicine and Public Health, or ICEMF. Another thing in the chat there for you to point out that we have a great journal, Evolution Medicine and Public Health. Please consider submitting your work there. Very committed editorial board, good turnaround time. I think you'll find it to be a nice home for your work in evolutionary medicine. There are two special issues at the moment, a new one on microbial evolution and another one on cancer, eco-evo applications in cancer. And then, very importantly, I want to call your attention to our annual conference, the Society's annual conference. And that is going to be July 28th to the 31st in lovely Kiel. Beautiful time of year to be there in northern Germany. And we really hope you'll join us. If you click on that link, you can find links for registration, submitting abstracts, and things like that, including applications for travel support for trainees. Okay, I think I covered everything. We've got a great turnout today. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'm now going to turn things over to Barb Natterson Horowitz, who's going to do the introductions today.
Thanks, Charlie. Well, I'm thrilled to introduce our presenter this morning, or whatever time of day you happen to be, Dr. Camilla Scaff, and then moderate a discussion following her brief presentation. It should be about a 25-minute presentation, and we'll go right into questions and discussion. So Dr. Camilla Scaff's research bridges developmental psychology, linguistics, anthropology, and evolutionary medicine. She completed her doctorate at the Laboratory of Cognitive Science and Psycholinguistics, LSCP, in Paris. And she holds two postdoctoral positions, the first at the Institute of Evolutionary Medicine, the University of Zurich, in the Human Ecology Group, where she works with Dr. Adrian Yegi, investigating manifestations of mental health-related conditions among the Tsimane. And the second at LSCP, where she works with Dr. Alejandrina Cristia, studying cross-cultural language acquisition, again with a focus on the Tsimane. And this morning, Dr. Scaff will be presenting work that is featured in the November 2025 EMPH article, which she is the first and corresponding author, assessing subclinical psychopathological and personality traits in a small-scale subsistence society. And in this paper, the authors present work where they address questions including the fundamental nature of psychiatric conditions and the challenges of understanding psychopathology in radically different cultural and ecological settings. And with that, I'll pass off to Camilla.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Is it working? Yes. Okay, perfect. And can everyone hear me okay? A small nod? Yes, okay, fantastic. I'm really excited to be here, so thank you so much for the floor. We've been working on this for a couple of years now, and it's very thrilling to finally be sharing at least the first batch of what will come next with you all. And thank you, Barbara, for that introduction. Hey, click. Yes. Before continuing, as Barbara said, yes, this is the paper that I'll be discussing and presenting. It is a very methodologically heavy paper, so here I wanted to talk a little bit more about the behind the scenes that went into making this paper, and our motivations, our next steps, and our goals that we had with collecting this data. And of course, I want to give the credit to all my co-authors, but especially to Alberto Vietallo and Agustina Banicuata, the two Tsimane researchers who definitely did most of the heavy lifting and were part of every step of the process into making this paper, collecting this data, and making this happening. As Barbara said, I'm part of the Human Ecology Group, and when I first joined the group around in 2019, we were already having these discussions about evolutionary psychiatry, evolutionary psychology, mental health, and life history trade-offs. And I think a very important underlying question that comes from these conversations is there an evolutionary history of psychological traits? And I think for anyone who has endured a condition, who is going through it, and I think there is some kind of hope into thinking that maybe in not all contexts, not at all times, what you're experiencing would have been dysfunctional, but rather that in some other context, in some other moment, it could have been neutral or even adaptive. And that's kind of where we want to get with this endeavor. And of course, one of the immediate challenges that we have into studying the psychological introspection of the humans of the past is that the archaeological record is extremely limited into giving us any kind of clue about what was the subjective experience of the humans of the past. There's only so much that currently, we will see in the future, that really bones can tell us. And but there is a lot that current humans and humans living in different environments can tell us about the subjective experience. So here I want to share a small anecdotal report and ethnography about a reindeer herder community in Siberia, described by Piers Vitebsky. This was shared with me by my colleague Adam Hunt some years ago, and I think it illustrates pretty well kind of the point that we want to make, in which here we have the description of a particular man named the Nikitin grandfather, who had detailed knowledge of the parentage, medical history, and moods of each one of the 2,600 animals of the herd. So here the animal is the main economic resource of this community. And importantly, he was more comfortable in the company of reindeer than of humans, and he always pitched his tent some away from everyone else and cooked for himself. So we have this more flavor about the personality and maybe the behavior of this man. We also know that he had sons and grandsons. And I think in that sense, it kind of illustrates, and we kind of speculate a lot about whether this man had any kind of condition or diagnosis or anything, but this man was essential for his community. This man had a family, and I think it illustrates where the line of what a functional behavior is and a mental disorder can start is kind of fluid, and it might depend a lot of where you are and when you are at. So this idea of the spectrum in which how many of these traits, the psychological traits, manifest within a spectrum, and that is flexible. So yeah. So in this context, I've been working with the Tsimane for almost 10 years now. And for those who know, the Tsimane are an indigenous horticulturalist forager community in the lowland Bolivia. And to some extent, the socio-ecological conditions that they experience are more similar are more similar than the experience that some Western industrialized people live in comparison to the evolutionary past. So they live in tight communities. They're a subsistence community. That means that the majority of the food that they consume, they either hunt it, fish it, or grow it themselves. And they're experiencing a growing gradient of market integration. And it's in this community that I've worked for a long time now that we want to quantify psychological traits in order to test eventually evolutionary hypotheses about the origin and maintenance of psychopathology. And as I said, they live in a small, tight community life. They're, on average, more physically active than a Western industrialized individual. They have a healthier diet. They have minimal social exposure, social media exposure, and have minimal exposure to some other common risk factors that have been associated with psychopathology, such as C-section, pesticides, SSRI intake, and you name it. There's really a lot there. More often than not, on cross-cultural psychology, or what you would do in order to try to test a psychological construct into another community is that you take what exists, you adapt it, and you create a questionnaire. In this context, this was not that easy, as you can possibly imagine. But I don't want to go into all the details into how we did all the different steps. I think that for that, I will point you to the paper. As I said, it was very methodologically heavy. But I want to give you some flavor about where were the challenges and the roadblocks that we face in trying to doing this work. So you need to start somewhere, and where we decided to start was with the list of already existing questionnaires that have been widely used in the psychology literature, but also on some recent evolutionary papers studying psychopathology. So here's the list. I will not go more into details. So this is all the aberrations that you might see a little bit again. I do want to say that in general, we were interested on the spectrum of autistic spectrum disorder, on the spectrum of schizotypy, ADHD, anxiety, depression. We also added personality because so many of these traits at the subclinical level look a lot like personality traits. We're also interested about the consumption of substance abuse, sleep problems, current life conflicts, and life satisfaction too. So we started with materials that were designed for self-assessment, that were designed not for clinical populations, but rather for subclinical populations that were already being used in the evolutionary psychopathology literature. And we personally were not really focused on syndromes at this stage, but rather at specific traits and specific behavior. Of course, this has important limitations and important considerations to have, is that the Tsimane experienced very high levels of low literacy. So reading self-assessment is definitely out of the table. So we had to transform this into an interview. The habit of introspection, the habit of asking yourself about your subjective experience and phenomenology can be quite particular, I think, from maybe our society, and it's not something that necessarily all cultures experience in the same way. So we need to find the probes and the way to talk the same language, right? And of course, in order to get quantitative traits, we wanted to have a scale and a rating scale, and the use of that can be quite challenging. So there is this tension between subjectivity and capturing subjectivity, so the quantitative measures behind it. And of course, also, the Tsimane are not an homogeneous population in the sense that there are ongoing market integration, as you see with some of these pictures, but also there is, you have communities that live near the riverbank, so they're more into river activities, but others are more in the forest. There's different types of religious influence that have shaped some of the values and the local cultures that you have. Some are Catholic, some are evangelical. The social density of some of the communities is different. Here, for instance, we were walking into a cluster that was about an hour away from anyone else walking. So, and some others are they all live quite close together. So there's quite a lot of variation there. And basically what we did with Agustina and Alberto, and in this case also Manuel, we really wanted to explore many of these instruments that already existed and juxtapose them with the local knowledge. So what does ring a bell? Have you seen something like this? How would you explain this concept to someone else? And this took months of only the three of us, plus Dr. Van der Driesch, who's a psychiatrist, going item by item and getting the underlying construct that that question was trying to probe. I'm going to give more concrete examples shortly. So, for instance, I'm showing you here a picture of someone carrying their bed, as you can say in Tsimane. This person represents, if you just think about that, is, okay, someone just carrying the bed. That's someone who is on the move, who will not sleep in their house, but will sleep somewhere else. Many Tsimane have dual residence, so they will stay in the other place. But what this image means for the Tsimane, when you say it as a term as an idiom, it means someone who is unreliable, someone who is restless, someone who might not finish what they start, someone who tends to get away from things. So all these things is what this idiom represents on its own. And in addition to that, the metaphor that they use to really describe it, because it looks like it, as someone carrying a plantain branch. So this is one of the many, many examples of the idioms that we had to find in order to find the common ground and find the very quick metaphor that exactly conveys something that we talk about. And of course, when we were asking about this question specifically, people vary in spectrum. So not someone who would be nicknamed with this term would not necessarily be always like that. But there are some people who were always like that, and people had some kind of negative impression of them, whereas every so often people would joke around. It's like, oh, you're being like that, only in this moment, or just teasing around. So those are the things that we probe with different participants. So now I want to talk a little bit more about the focus group part of our paper. So we conducted 58 different focus groups in 5 different communities. I don't know why in the paper I put 3. It's actually 5. And in these focus groups, once that we have identified essential idioms that were present in the different instruments that we had, that's where we sampled for the extremes. It's like, okay, if this person manifests this trait, what is the extreme version of this? Have anyone ever noticed something like this? And how this trait interfere with the person's life? So here's where we really try to see what was defined as normal behavior, and when it became a deficit or some kind of an illness or some kind of limitation of penalization of the person. We also, through these groups, we observe the reaction to certain behaviors, things that we might have, we consider more stigmatizing for whatever reason, such as hallucinations or some kind of behavior specifically, versus some others that I would not expect to be such taboo. And then through probing each of these concepts with the questions in the focus groups is how we elaborated related examples for each of the questions, and we decided which ones were not really working at all and why. So I'm going to give you, I want to walk you through one concrete example. The autism quotient. So the AQ, its purpose is to measure autistic-like traits in adults. It's a self-administered questionnaire. It has 50 questions. It's a screening tool, so that means that up to a certain threshold, you'll be recommended to maybe see a specialist. And this is the publication that came with. So for each of the questions of the AQ, we put the local expert knowledge in between the questions that came from it. And we found the idioms and the specific lexicon in order to convey the same underlying construct. So this is one of the figures of the paper. And the first AQ here that you see, the acronym, had on average 35% of retained questions, and then the rest was abandoned. And I want to walk you through a little bit of what this abandoned category really means. So yes, here do you see then the display for all these scales. The majority of the reason for abandoning a question was because it ended up being redundant. So this also speaks to the comorbidity to some extent of many of these instruments and how certain traits appear. Some others were dropped because of low reliability into making them in a self-assessment, into making an interview rather than a self-assessment. And some had very concrete cross-cultural limitations. But I do want to say that this abandoned category is quite arbitrary, and I'm going to show you why. So first example, this is an AQ question. I would rather go to a library than a party. I think that it's very easy to know that the underlying construct of the question doesn't have anything to do with a library per se or a party, but rather the preference for the person to be alone rather than to be with others. So it was way more clear. It was presented more clear in another instrument, so the BAPQ. So this was why it was labeled then a redundant question. Because we had to transform it into a question, we transformed it first into, do you prefer to be alone? But that was very vague, so we needed to add more prompts. So there is a cultural institution, I want to say, among the Tsimane, that is to visit people. So people visit and get visited. It's extremely common. Everyone greets you saying, like, are you visiting me? So it's a very important part of their culture. So people who actually doesn't like to be visited or like to visit is a very strong marker of someone who might have low sociability. So that's how we decided at the end to take this initial construct and make it more relatable in the local context. This is another example. When younger, I enjoyed playing games involving pretending with other children. In general, and quite popularly, people did always understood this question. So we just transform it slightly into, when you were a child, did you like to play to pretend to be other people? In order to make it more concrete, we sampled during the focus groups different anecdotes of people that pretended to be that did pretend play basically when they were children. So this was to pretend to be an animal, pretend to play family, pretend to be a character of a given story. So this item actually was very unproblematic. And this is a question, for instance, that ended up being abandoned, which is, I'm fascinated by numbers. And here the problem is mostly related to the fact that there's numbers, that we're in a community with low literacy, and numerical cognition in general is not something that engage people a lot. And people will say, like, people would be like, I'm fascinated by numbers. Like, no, of course. No one, and we got nothing near to some kind of behavior that would be similar to this. However, there was another question from the same subscale of the AQ that was, I'm not very good at remembering people's date of birth. So prompting a different type of behavior about memory. So we were really trying to find an equivalent to numbers that would be meaningful, but here this other question was more about date of birth, so maybe remembering things in general. So we ended up going for that question, are you good at remembering? In translation, you have to say things linguistically. And that's how we started asking questions about people. It's like, hey, do you know anyone who has really good memory, or that they remember things pretty easily? And there's quite a gradient of variation for this question. So there's people would get nominated for having, for instance, quite amazing genealogical knowledge. So people who could go many, many generations into naming everyone's both last names and where they were from, their origin community, and even some people who did know people's birth dates, even though that was extremely rare. Once we adapted each of the questions, or we gave the destiny to the were abandoned or retained, we pilot the interview. I will not go into a lot of details here, but we did some test retest, and we tested for interviewer effects and gender effects, so we could fix, so we can detect some systematic problems that we were having with the interview. And then what we did is with the 207 questions that were working more or less, we did cognitive interviews. So if you are not familiar what a cognitive interview is I ask you to explain me in your own words the question and tell me why did you rate yourself in the scale like that. So here I give you an example of, just being with my friends can make me feel really good, or do you like being with your friends? And to our big surprise, many respondents were saying no, but systematically, and we were not really understanding why. And when they gave us the answer, is because we didn't define the kinship term correctly. We were saying friends, and some people say, I don't have friends. And it's not that they don't have friends, but they were hanging out with their siblings or their cousins. So we're missing out this distinction in which people were thinking that we were talking about friends from outside. So that was our mistake, and that we only realized after making the cognitive interview. And through this, we train the interviewers, so Agustina and Alberto, for all these tiny misconceptions and tiny problems that we would find. We created proper systematic examples for most of the questions that we ended up using, and really how to use the scale. So at the end, we retained 117 questions. As I said before, the majority of these questions ended up being redundant with other scales. There is no one-to-one with the scales. That means that there is no one scale that survives in its entirety and is directly comparable in any way or form. We are not really, our goal is not really that. It takes roughly an hour, and that was really important for us because people also reacted very negatively to redundancy and wasting their time. So if they were realizing that we were asking something that was similar, they would say that to us, hey, you already asked me that. So I wanna move on. And so far we have collected more than 500 interviews, mostly done, the work done by Agustina and Alberto, of course. So in terms of implications and about some of the things that we learn doing this work, I think that this idea that low literacy and comprehension is very high everywhere in people having the self-assessment is maybe overestimated. So I think that there's a great deal of variation into how people really understand questions, how they related to their own subjective experience and how they use this rating scale. So this actually, I think, is a reflection for this these questionnaires to begin with. And what we want to do now with this scale is that there is a lot of speculation into adaptive benefits on some of these psychological traits. And we want to engage with the idea that maybe some of the ideas and goals of the neurodiversity movement into recognizing strengths, not only deficits, and normalizing difference and models of integration. One of the next things that we're really excited to do, and this was in collaboration, in the sense that the Tsimane government wanted us to study this, is into the relation of the psychological traits with the market integration. They're really worried into how market integration might be affecting people, and that's one of the first things that we want to also study, how the gradient relates to each of one of these traits. We want to study it in a relationship with fitness. Something very similar was already done with the Tsimane by Mike Gervin in studying specifically personality traits. But here we aim to enlarge this scope. And two of my students, Lea Frauenfelder and Ronja Schmoll, are currently working on this. And we're really excited. With this data also, we aim to test some theories that are already out there, some hypotheses. For instance, the diametrical model of Bernie Crespi that established that autism spectrum condition and schizotypal spectrum disorder might negatively relate to each other. And that's one of the things that we also can test with this data. And also we want to see the stability of the traits over time by conducting a longitudinal analysis. I want to end this part of the talk before going to the discussion to say how crucial the inclusion of local knowledge and the local people was for this. I was a vehicle, basically, but Agustina and Alberto did really an amazing job into conducting the interviews and finding exactly the right terminology that I'm finding us halfway, basically. Doing this type of cross-cultural research is hard and costly. It took us 5 years and 5 6 field trips in order to complete this first part of data, just making the interview happen. And I think that there's a lot to gain into understanding the limits of a questionnaire of a given culture and how and what is interaction with the society, with the environment, with the culture, and why some questions didn't work and why. With that, I want to thank you for your attention. And a special thank you, of course, to all the Tsimane participants who were extremely patient and amazing into making these conversations just so interesting and rich. They participated a lot. They asked us a lot of questions too. The Human Ecology Group, Beatrice Borks, of course, the other research assistants, Manuel Arnolfo, Jersey and Lorgio, Francisco Rodriguez and Gandhi Yetish, and the Fondation Pierre Mercier pour la Science. And thank you so much for your attention.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That's fascinating. I know there are questions in the chat, and please raise your hand and I'll call on you and we can ask questions. But this is such important work, laying the groundwork for quantifying subclinical psychopathology and personality traits in different cultures and settings. All right, so let's go ahead and I don't see any hands raised, but we have a question from Rebecca Hanel Peters, and it'd be great if you're on. Forgive me, I do see hands up. But go ahead if Rebecca Hanel Peters. I can read the question. Okay, go ahead.
Thanks for the talk. Is really, really cool stuff. So I was trained by one of my mentors was John Patton before he passed away, and he worked with the Achuar and Quechua, and a lot of his work uses this like photo ranking task. So because personality and some of these social traits tend to be relevant to oneself, it could be really interesting. Have you considered using this type of task to see where they judge where others fall relative to themselves? As that could be also another way to get at this question.
I think that that's a very interesting approach that we did consider. So I think that multimedia, so photos and videos for this first part in which we just sat down with the Tsimane researchers was sometimes very essential into explaining kind of what a behavior was or a trait was, to show them through. I think videos were even better. So we were on YouTube and sometimes like, okay, this. And it's like, oh, that. Okay, perfect. And it's like, no, I've never seen that before. So that was, so in some cases it was like, yes, perfectly. And then we mastered the idiom way faster, and some were and some are so also idiosyncratic to a society, to a culture, that they were like, I think that I think I know you guys because, Alberto and Agustina have worked with anthropologists for over 10 years each. And it's like, you guys do that. I know that you're stressed when you do that, but like, we don't do that. Like, I've never seen someone doing that, for instance. Actually, a funny anecdote we have with that is that for the word stress, there's no one-to-one word for stress. There is worrying, like to worry or being very worried that it takes a lot of space in your mind, some kind of idiom that resembles that. But the main person that they thought about when stressing was this very specific person in the Bolivian town. It's like, yes, she's always she's always stressed. I know what you mean by stress, like because of her, but not no one necessarily from the Tsimane community. So I think that was quite interesting, and thank you for your suggestion. But it was really helpful for the first part.
Cool, thank you.
You're welcome.
Charlie.
Thank you for a great talk, Camila. That was really nice. What a huge amount of work. And really appreciate the approach that you take, and excited to see the next steps on this. I had a couple of questions. I was wondering about the market integration, if you could say a little bit more about that. It looked like you had kind of 3 different communities that vary in market integration, but you can also imagine, oh, I see. Oh, no. Okay. So the market integration was these discrete categories.
Yeah, this is just a fake figure.
Oh, okay.
I just made it as an illustration of some of the things that we want to look at.
I was wondering if you had like individual level data on market integration, or if you're just doing it in different communities that, are more market integrated or more, closer to markets. For example, in some of our work, we have different measures of market integration we use, like number of consumer goods owned, or we have other dimensions that are more related to the crops that they sell, which presumably involves engaging with markets, or how they build their homes, what their homes are built with. I just wonder what kind of other measures you're thinking of there.
Those are all measures that I know the THLHP, I'm terrible with acronyms, by the way, has used a lot. So the Tsimane Life History and
Okay.
Health Project has collected for studying socioeconomic status diversity too, and within individual
Okay.
variation. That's something that we definitely plan to do in the future. So far, we collected more demographic individual data, and we're going to start looking at broad market integration differences through village, so proximity to town. But also we have this, for instance, this new access to antennas that you see in the picture that have been in some communities, even though some were quite remote, and some new roads that have been done in the territory. So we're going to start there, and then hopefully to get to more individual level difference in terms of that specifically.
That's great. If I could just ask a second question
Yeah,
quickly.
of course. I mean,
So
I
that was
guess.
about market integration. What about social integration?
So for that we did collect. So
Okay.
we did collect social network of people in
Okay.
terms of yes, who were their closest friends or their closest network, and who, in addition to that, they shared food on a regular basis. So we do hope to see, one of the things that I'm really excited to see, if there's this, if we have some kind of the social related items do correlate with people who might actually engage in, have smaller social networks, for instance. There is some kind of correlation there that we could see from the questionnaire.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Aurelia Valente has a question. Aurelia, are you on? I can read it.
Thank you. This is super fascinating talk. Thank you so much. I am doing a lot of research on the sort of looking at social insects actually, and sort of behavioral diversity in that realm. Obviously the human component is incredibly important. I was wondering what the plans are for the next stages of this research. If you plan to go into more of the ecological and evolutionary impacts of this, or where that's headed.
Yeah, thank you for your question. So the now that we finally collected all this data, and we plan to do some longitudinal data too, where I presented you here, this relationship with market integration, this relationship with fitness, and this relationship between traits and the stability over time are the 4 axes where we aim to take the research next, more concretely. I think specifically you asked into, and we plan to do item level analysis, especially in relationship with fitness, to see really how specific traits, rather than clusters or syndromes, might be related to specific fitness measures. Did I answer your question?
Camilla,
Yes.
I wonder if you might comment. So you've identified, there are lots of limitations in these standard psychiatric instruments when you're applying them cross-culturally. But and we talked a little bit about this before, but if you would just sort of share your thoughts about whether you think this is an opportunity to rethink how we're assessing and trying to understand patients in weird societies. So where we also might be missing important, dimensions of experience.
Yes, I think that's a great point. I think I tried to convey that one slide, in the sense that, I mean, to begin with, something that I didn't say, but in the way that people experience distress and how we cope with some of, of how life is. I think that in Western context, we tend to really rationalize a lot and think about our subjective experience as it is. And we tend to ignore to what extent we somatize many of what's going on. And I think that's one of the things that I realized a lot there is that this is very common in cross-cultural psychology, in which, a trait that it would be very like, oh, I have rumination, but actually in another culture, it would be spoken or manifested more as a headache or as having a feeling that your heart is burning, or all these kind of idioms that, or more concretely, my back hurts chronically. I have this knee joint pain, and that we might tend to ignore and not attribute them as a psychological distress or something that might be going on because it's not evident in our head in such way. I think that we might, I think to some extent we tend to overestimate that. And to pay more attention to that, I think is important.
I also wanted to just to go back to the carrying the bed, that
Yes.
wonderful sequence early on. And I'm just wondering that you alluded to it might reflect a kind of a personality trait. Can you just explain a little bit more about, how where that came to be, and what were you asking about ADHD-like characteristics?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So yes, we were kind of in the part of the questionnaire that we were reviewing the ADHD scale. And, they have these questions about being restless, getting up and down of your chair. I mean, that's a concrete kind of item which is being asked. And, the first approach, and it's, of course, it makes a lot of sense. And I think that this also responds to your previous question, which you can be very concrete into answering this question. It's like, why did you get up of the chair? Why you were so impatient? It's like, I had to go to the bathroom, or like, I was really bored. And I mean, of course, that's a very absolutely understandable question, answer to that question. But the construct that we were prompting, right? It wasn't you're just jumping in your chair. It's more your restlessness and this trait that is persistent in time about your restlessness, and people characterize you because of it. And I think that this was the image that we had from these people, is that every so often, and I was surprised to the extent that this was considered negative, but someone who carries their bed, this plantain branch metaphor, is someone who's not in the community, is someone who's using a space that is being harvested and then not taken care of. It's competing for a space that's probably wanted by other people. It means that, their house is accumulating maybe trash. It means that they're not being part of the community. It means that and overall, it has this connotation of being unreliable, or that you not finish what you start. Another interesting, for instance, anecdote we had with that was for the river communities, for men specifically, about making canoes. So we were asking, so making a canoe in Tsimane land, it takes quite a lot of effort because you don't by hand, you're carving a giant log, right? So we asked, okay, and it takes normally more than one person to make. But we had some accounts of individuals that would do it in 2 weeks. And I don't think that you can possibly understand the amount of effort that could do, even if they're using some kind of electric tool, it's an enormous amount of time. And for some people that would manage to do that in such a short time because they were not doing anything else. So they became kind of obsessed. So that's kind of the take that we had, is like, once I'm starting doing something, I'm not stopping, and I'm doing so. And on the other hand, someone more reliable, that they will start often to this process, but they will wait so long that the wood will rot. And of course, for many people, they were in between. It's like, sometimes if I really need it, I will do it fast. And for some others, if it's not necessary, it might have happened to me that, it rotten. But for some cases, some individuals systematically, no matter the case, no exception, they always did it as fast as they could. And that's kind of this variation and this variance that we see and the stability of a trait, right? And for other individuals, systematically, no matter the case, they will make the rotten, I mean, they will rot the log. So this idea of not finishing what you start, and in another kind of metaphor, in another way, in which is like, oh, are you the kind of person who let it rot? That was less often necessarily because you needed to be in a river community and being a man, kind of to be like for that prompt to be really useful for you, but it allow already to be in the same mind and space with all the communities. It's like, oh, I know what that means. I know why you're kind of asking me. Yeah.
That is fascinating. Are there any other questions? Oh, I see. Okay, Virginia. Sorry, I was looking for the yellow signal. Virginia Vitsum, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I can't figure out how to put up a little yellow hand. Your work is amazing and very important across a whole bunch of areas of human existence, and I'm very impressed. And part of what I'm wondering in part is about gender differences, and perhaps if you've seen that. I've worked for 40 years now, I can't believe it, in different cultures, at least a half dozen, and seen these differences. And I think part of the reason that I so enjoy fieldwork is because it's not Western culture and the way that women are treated. And I've seen some differences, and then there are people who seem very comfortable in one environment but not another. And one of the things that has always struck me is how gender plays a role so strongly in Western European American culture, and how it's a different role, or at least a much more comfortable role for me. And I recognize I'm Western, I'm money, I've got, a whole lot of things going there too. But if you work for as many years as I did in some of these communities, you get really comfortable and they get comfortable with you. And so I was just wondering about this aspect. And I personally really want to push you to do more. And if I were a millionaire, I'd fund you. So anyway, please answer. Sorry.
Thank you so much. Yes, there's so for context, the Tsimane are quite patriarchal, and they have quite clear gender roles in the society, and also it translates a lot into what a typical day looks like. So a typical day doesn't look the same for a man or for a woman, since very early on. One of the first steps that we had while doing this interview is that we tested specifically for seeing which questions were showing different distributions for men and women. We also had a third interview during that process, who was Manuel, who was, Alberto did most of the men because of this, because we ask kind of personal questions. So a man will not talk to a woman who, even if she's in the interviewer. So the interviewer kind of needed to be more of a man. It was more of the case that if a man was asking a woman, she would answer, especially an older man. So we had this test case for Manuel, who split females and males. Agustina would do only the females. And then we sat down and see, that's why we could tease apart interviewer effects from gender effects. And we look which of the traits were showing very skew distribution by gender. And we did some kind of and we then sat down as like, okay, are you asking the question differently? Is this because you're simply asking the question with a very concrete example that might be driven the difference, or is this a real underlying gender effect? And in some cases, we realized that, the question was not being asked in the same way. So we rephrased and we practiced and we did it again. And for some, they were just different. Now, I don't remember by heart. I've been trying to be very blind to look at the distributions and specific traits to not self-bias myself. I have all these codes for the questions, so I don't really know what they are. But we are going to look at gender effects. Some questions inherently had to have specific examples tailored for the different activities. So as I gave this example for the canoe and the men, women tend to do these purses. that also take a lot of time, and it's kind of a endeavor. And we had a lot of variation also into how fast certain women tend to do that task without being interrupted, without or just drop it, how they will react if they made a mistake, for instance. This is also for another question, the how you react to some kind of imperfection. We had some women who, cases of, they would destroy it, and they will go with a machete and would just be like anger lashing out into it. Whereas some would be like, I don't care. Or some, if you make a mistake, I don't want to do it again. And you have like all these subtleties and this difference that we saw for that particular behavior. Of course, more often than not, I think this question, for instance, that I show here, that we had to change, do you prefer to be alone? We did have to make that slight change of, do you like being alone? Because most women, have 8 children, and they will be like, it's not a preference. I don't have a choice. That would be their answer. It's like, I cannot be alone. What are you talking about? And it's like, okay, so that's why the example was so important, is like, because the shared concept of imagining themselves or just being alone, it was like, this is not real. This doesn't happen to me. One of the, for instance, items that we completely had to drop were everything that was related to time off. How do you relax? Those kind of questions were simply what people were like, I don't have time to, that free time in the way that you're asking and enjoying it and envisioning it, just simply, especially for women, was not true, and they were not engaged with it. It's not that it doesn't exist, and it doesn't mean that they cannot imagine it. It's just simply that the answer to the question, and because we have to ask it, is I don't have time.
Yeah.
Period.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
That is fantastic. So with that, I think we're going to wrap things up. I would call everybody's attention to the wonderful paper, and which ends actually the paper. Its goals are, it says it's one of the core goals is to support and encourage others who are conducting culturally grounded instrument adaptation, and calls for transparent documentation. And this group certainly did that. There are, I think you said 50 pages of
70.
supplemental material or more.
70 pages of
Okay.
each item has its destiny explained for people to kind of know what happened.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much. Really marvelous talk. And thank you for everybody's questions and contributions.
Thank you so much for listening and for having me.
Yes, thank you. Thanks everybody for joining. Just a reminder to please consider coming to the conference, the International Society for Evolution Medicine and Public Health, in late July. You can find information on the website that I shared earlier in the chat. I also just shared the link to the paper that was discussed. And finally, we think that we have a Club Ev Med for next week. We're just waiting on confirmation. And so stay tuned. Okay, thanks everybody for joining. Thanks, Barb. Thanks,
Thanks,
Camila.
Charlie.
Thanks, Mary.
Thank you, Charlie.
Bye.
Good to see everybody.